Good evening, good morning, rather. Shabbat Shalom. It's good to have you together. This is Valley Beth Shalom live and online. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined today for Torah study with my dear friend, Rabbi Marc Gellman. Rabbi Hirsch is taking a little bit of vacation time with her family, and we wish her good rest and relaxation. We welcome you this morning. We're studying the book of Bamidbar. We are right in the middle of the Midbar, and that's exactly how this is to be described. The Midbar is the wilderness. And the book of Bamidbar takes us on a guided tour of the wilderness of the human soul, the dark side of human being. And last week, we took off from Mount Sinai and began the journey toward the promised land, to be stopped immediately by the people's kvetching about not having sufficient food and water and entertainment, and Moses giving up and God bolstering him and sending them on their way. Well, this morning, we arrive at our promised land. This morning, we actually arrive at the goal. This is really the end of the journey. But before we can enter the land and take possession, Moses is instructed by God to send scouts or spies to scout out the land and prepare for its conquest. Shlach Lecha begins in the Eitz Chaim Chumash on page 840, or whatever Chumash you're in, look for page 840. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Send men to scout out the land of Canaan, which I'm giving you. Take one man from his ancestral tribe, one chieftain among them." These are important guys. So Moses, by the Lord's command, sent them from the wilderness of Paran, all the men being leaders, and it gives us their names, and they send them out into the land. And the men go out into the land, 12 men, scout out the land, scout out its cities and its farms and its vistas, and they return to the people. And the report is remarkable. Everyone agrees that the land is a land of milk and honey. But the 10 of the spies turn to the people and say, "But the people of this land are giants, and we were as grasshoppers in their eyes, and so we felt to ourselves." And it's left to Joshua and Caleb to try to bolster the spirits of the people. But at this point, the people's spirits are destroyed, and they're not willing to go up and take the land. And this is the next betrayal. Moses is still dealing with betrayal after betrayal. And here the people Israel, after years of slavery, after 2 years in the desert, have arrived at the end of their dream. They have achieved everything they wanted. And when it's presented to them, they're unwilling to take it. They're unwilling to go and fight for their own dream. They're unwilling to take possession of the dream, the goal that had been promised them for so many generations. It's a terrible moment of discouragement, of despair, disillusionment. And it's a terrible moment when God gives up on this people and says, "Go back out in the desert. Die in the desert and bring me a generation of those who can take this land and are ready to have the future be theirs." And the people go out into the desert, and that's how our Torah portion will conclude. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, my teacher, my friend. How are you?
All right, thank you. Talk to us about these spies. Talk to us about what it is in these men that makes them so discouraged, so disillusioned, and with the power to disillusion an entire people from the one dream that has held them together and kept them going forward all this time.
Great question, and that was a lovely introduction. And it's true. The things that are always amazed me about the spies is, first of all, that they all agreed on every single fact about the land. They come back with different reports. Caleb and Joshua say, "We can take the land." And the other spies, the 10 spies, say, "Well, we're like grasshoppers. We can't take the land." But none of them dispute what they saw. They all see a land of milk and honey, and the grapes that were so big they had to put them on poles, which became the image of the Israeli Tourist Bureau. And they all agree with everything that is factual about the land. So what they disagree about is what they believed about what they saw. So what they saw was the same thing. They saw the same thing, but they didn't believe the same thing. So my feeling about the spies is that the spies are a metaphor I know you feel you do this a lot, and you feel it's a productive way, and I've learned from you that sort of Sartre's point, in each man we can see all of man, that these characters, and Philo did this, of course, supremely in the first century, making all the characters of the Torah allegorical, but you've done this beautifully, and that is, there's a metaphor here, and that is, the spies are really all of us, Ed. They're us. We are the spies. And the land is everything we see in our lives, everything we see. And the challenge is not whether we can conquer the land. That's the ostensible reason for the disagreement. The challenge is whether we can conquer our fears. There's a rabbinic teaching that when we die, we go to a kind of soul, I call it soul school, sort of like Defending Your Life, the Albert Brooks movie, which is very close to Jewish teachings, actually, where you go somewhere and the angels who were with you your whole life, one negative angel, one positive angel, they debrief you on everything you did in your life. And that's why we say Kaddish for a year, because if you have a complicated life, it could take a year to go through all the stuff you did. And the main thing that you do in soul school is the angels ask you, why were you afraid of this? Why were you afraid to go to medical school when you knew you wanted to be a doctor? Why were you afraid to go up to that person and ask them for a date? Why were you afraid to say to your boss, I can do that. I can take that challenge on. I can do it. Why were you afraid to give your opinion in the presence of people who may be more credentialed than you, but don't understand things as deeply as you understand them? Why were you afraid of everything you were afraid of? Why? What made you afraid? And as you know, the most common phrase in the whole Torah, when you unpack everything of what is repeated, it's not Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe. That's not the most common phrase. The most common phrase in the Torah is Al Tira. Do not be afraid. And I think that's the most fundamental message of Judaism. And frankly, in my studies of world religions, it's the most common message of all religions. Do not be afraid. Because whether we can overcome the obstacles that are presented in our life is really not about the obstacles. That question is not a question about what mountains do we face. It's a question about whether we are afraid to try to conquer them. I mean, we may try to conquer things that are in our path that we don't conquer. I've counseled, and I know you have as well, alcoholics, drug addicts, people who are struggling with depression, and some of them were able to conquer it. And some of them were just not able to conquer it. And it's not because they were weak. It's because they didn't believe in themselves. They weren't able to overcome their fear. So for me, the spies represent the ultimate human choice. And they take us through the teaching of Shmuel Bar Nachmani, in Marin La'adam Ela Mahar Hore Libo, that we do not see things as they are, we see things as we are. That is as deep a truth as I think the Torah has for all of us to learn. That's what the spies mean to me, Ed.
So let's look at one line, which I think is the most interesting line of the story.
Yeah.
The spies come back and they say, this is chapter 13 at the very end, right?
Okay.
The country we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. Eretz Ochelet Yoshveha.
Yeah, great phrase.
All the people we saw are men of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, these mythical creatures. The Anakites are part of the Nephilim. And here it says, Visham ra'inu et hanifilim, b'nei anak, b'nei hanifilim, u'nehi be'enenu kechagavim, v'kein hayinu b'neihem. And we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them. We looked like grasshoppers. We felt like grasshoppers in the presence of these mythical giants, and that's how we must have looked to them. Talk about that. What's that? That's something called projection. What is that?
Well, and that's lack of self-image. That's who am I? What am I? Who am I to stand up against the Nephilim? What chance do I have? I'm playing one-on-one against Michael Jordan. What chance do I have? And sometimes you don't have a chance. But sometimes what looks like the Nephilim to you, because you're so scared and you're feeling so beaten down, don't forget these are slaves. And what they're being asked to believe is that they have the capacity to seize their freedom. For a slave to believe that, after hundreds of years of slavery, ingrained after generation, that's not a small thing to ask. It's an immense thing to ask. And so a lot of us feel like grasshoppers. I wake up some days and I feel like a grasshopper. I look at what I have to do. I look at all the things spread out before me that I can't solve and I want to solve. And, sometimes I despair. And I think the key to it is believing for just a moment, Ed, that they may not really be Nephilim. And we may not really be grasshoppers. That we may have read the situation incorrectly. That people we think are so much more qualified and capable than us may not be more qualified and may not be more capable. And there, I think a good grandma, a good mom, particularly sometimes it's a father, someone who raised you, who believed in you, and who believed you're not a grasshopper, who believed that you could achieve what you wanted to. How often when we hear stories of success from groups of people who were beaten down and suffered oppression, and those who succeeded so often had someone in their life who believed in them. So I think Joshua and Caleb were different than the other spies in that they were brought up with people who believed in them. And the other spies were slaves who had never believed that they could be more than a grasshopper.
That's a wonderful, wonderful insight. Let me propose a slightly different way to read the same basic idea.
Please.
If you look at the beginning of the Parsha, a little bit of linguistic stuff to start with. If you look at the very beginning of the Parsha, you have to have it in Hebrew to see this, right? Vayidaber Adonai Moshe lemor. God said to Moshe, Shlach lecha, send for yourself, anashim, men, vayaturu et eretz Canaan. The word vayaturu is translated here as to scout out. We'll come back to that word in a minute. Now come all the way to the end of the Torah portion, the Maftir section. It's on page 854 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. It's a section familiar to anyone who prays in a Jewish service because it's the third paragraph of the recitation of the Shema, the part about tzitziot, about fringes. V'yidaber Adonai Moshe lemor. It's chapter 15, verse 37. Vayomer Adonai al Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses, saying, Deber al bnei Yisrael v'yamarta lehem. Talk to the people of Israel and tell them, Asu lehem tzitzit. Make these fringes on your clothes. Wear them all the time. Fringes will have a purple thread. Vayalachem letzitzit. They'll be your fringes. Ureitam otam. You'll see them. Uschartem et kol mitzvot Adonai vasitem otam. You'll see the fringes and you'll remember that you're to do these mitzvot. Now that would be the commandment. That's enough of a commandment. The next line is remarkable, though. These fringes have to have another role, not just to do the mitzvot, but what? Look at the next line. V'lo taturu acharei levavchem ve'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem. Lo taturu, don't go. Well, there's that same word, taturu. It meant scouting or spying or whatever in the beginning of the text. Here, taturu means to follow your eyes slavishly. Lo taturu acharei levavchem. Don't go after your own heart, your impulses, and after your eyes, atem zonim achareihem, because you will be. Now, the word zonah in Hebrew is a whore, a prostitute. You will lose yourself to your impulses. You will lose yourself to your desires. As you said, you'll lose yourself to your fears. So here's my proposal. Taturu at the beginning of the parsha, go latura ta'aretz, and at the end of the parsha, lo taturu. You'll wear these fringes so that you don't do this. Now, what could it mean? So I have a suggestion to make. The modern Hebrew word latur is simply a translation of the word tourist. To be a tourist. Now think about that for just a second. It's kind of interesting. If I come into a land that's a strange land to me, I can come with a number of different motivations and with a number of different, let's call it a persona, which means a mask. I can come to the land as an immigrant, meaning I come to this place and I'm ready to settle here. I can come as a refugee, meaning I was pushed here and this was the only place I could find that would take me. I could come as a visitor. I could come to the place that belongs to me, even if I haven't been here in a long time. I'm returning home. I'm a returning exile. Or I could come as a tourist. And what does it mean to come as a tourist? If you think for a moment. I remember, if you've ever been in a place where it gets a lot of tourists, we live in LA, so we get a lot of tourists. When I was living in Israel, we used to sit and make fun of the tourists, because we were living there. So what is a tourist? A tourist is a person who arrives on a big air-conditioned bus with very thick smoked glass windows and looks out at you as if you're a creature from another planet. And that's exactly the metaphor, because the bus is like a space capsule. And the poor tourist now comes off the bus in his plaid shorts and his polo shirt, and he carries a camera on his chest the size of an oxygen pack. And the camera sets a distance between us because it says, don't get too close to me. A tourist is a person who wants to visit a place, but doesn't want that place to touch him. He wants to sample a little bit of its culture, buy a few souvenirs, taste a little bit of the food, but he doesn't belong to this place. He doesn't really invest himself in this place. He doesn't really care about the place, and he wants to get the hell out of there as soon as he can. Get back on the bus, get back to the Hilton Hotel. Remember, there used to be this wonderful book that was made into a mediocre movie called The Accidental Tourist. And it was about a guy who wrote a book of what it was is for business people who have to go abroad, how to live like an American wherever you go. So it had the tips, for example, where to find Kentucky Fried Chicken in Beijing or Taco Bell in New Delhi. So you never had to taste anything that was strange. You never had to breathe air that wasn't air conditioned. You never had to experience something that you weren't fully ready for and accustomed and accommodated to. You'd never be surprised. The tourist is a person who enters a land and never says, this is mine, never unpacks his bags, never really cares about the place. Right? Henry James, who was the American expatriate in Paris, once had an interesting thing. He left America, and he once commented, he said, America is a hotel culture. Such an interesting idea. He says, what is a hotel? A hotel is a place where I sleep and I eat, but it doesn't belong to me, and I don't belong to it, and I don't really care who are the people next door, and I don't even have to make my bed because someone will come in and do it. I don't care about this place. It's not mine. The spies came into the land as tourists, and they said, hey, it's got nice things, it's got scary things, but there's no sense of attachment, right? In Israel, you're called an oleh if you make aliyah to Israel, and when you enter the land as an oleh, you enter with a very different mindset than you enter as a tourist. It's mine. Its problems are mine. Its messes are mine to clean up. Its glories belong to me. So I think what's going on here, I think your insight is wonderful. This really is not about a land and about a conquering people. It's about how you experience life. And the Torah says, Lo taturu, don't be a tourist in the world. It's
That's
your
beautiful.
world. Take possession of your world and own it and protect it and be proud of it. Don't just be a visitor. Don't just be a visitor. And that's what this really comes to represent.
That's so beautiful and true and profound to the way we live. I think it also, to go back to the context of the story, let's just recall that what's happening here. God and Moses, the only beings, one human and one divine, in Egypt, and in the case of God, in all the universe, who were never slaves, had to emancipate a bunch of slaves. So the one thing they needed to understand, how do you free a slave? Neither of them really understood. And the dynamic that we've been reading, we've been going through Parsha by Parsha, is really about this incredibly deep, existential, spiritual quest to figure out a way to free a slave. And what you just taught may be the key to the whole thing, Latour, which is God finally gets the way to do it, and Moses comes along later, as usually happens. And that is, you have to destroy or let die their old home. They can't enter the land, they can't move forward unless they give up their own home. It's Gandhi's teaching, there is no transcendence without renunciation. There is no transcendence without renunciation. So getting them out of Egypt turned out to be the easy part. Getting Egypt out of them turned out to be the hard part. And the way to get Egypt out of them is to kill the Egypt that was in them. To let it die, not kill it, but to let it die. And what Moses sadly understands, and God definitely understands now, is that the only way to let it die is to let them die. And to let their children carry on this dream of freedom. And that's what it meant to not be a tourist. Because at the moment, even though they didn't have fancy tourist buses, the people who went into the land, the spies, they were in a tourist bus. And that tourist bus was Egypt Tours. And they're thinking on the bus, hey, you remember the garlic? You remember the quail? You remember the fish? You know, the one part of their complaint and their kvetch, which I definitely identify with, is, could you live in a place with no garlic? And my answer to that, Ed, is I have to think about it. I really would have to think about it. I think the answer is no. To tell you the truth, I think the answer is no.
You're a New Yorker, Gellman. You're a New Yorker. You couldn't live in a world without garlic.
I think that's right. Hey, and Jewish food too.
Or egg creams.
Let me ask your reaction to this. One last point, which was the first verse. We jumped over Shalach Lecha. Remember Lech Lecha? Why isn't it just Lech or Shalach? What is the Lecha part? And I think I believe the Torah has clues, and we learn these clues, and these clues are embedded in the Torah. And one of the clues is Lecha, that this is leave your land for yourself, for your own spiritual journey. Go send the spies for yourself. God didn't need to send people to spy out the land. God knew what the land was. Moses knew what the land was. They needed it for themselves, to believe in themselves. And they failed that test.
Right. Lecha also, the Midrash on Lech Lecha is that it means go into yourself. And here, shlach lecha is go into yourself. Go find that part of yourself which is prepared to accept that which you've been dreaming of and fighting of, and go and confront that part which is too afraid to take it, and go figure that part of yourself out. It's the Hasidic tradition makes a whole religion out of this. Go inside. That's where the journey is. The midbar is inside. The journey is inside, and the promised land is inside. Because when you find the place of home, not the tourist place, but the home that you belong in, that's also inside. That's the salvation.
Yes. And I remember Norman Cohen taught at HUC. He taught Midrash, and he had this wonderful Chiddush in which he said Mitzrayim is from Meitzar, which is a constricted place. So Egypt isn't just a place, it's our spiritual state when we are constricted, depressed, and when we feel put upon by even the smallest task. And I just think this is really the high Torah that is embedded in the low Torah. The low Torah is there were spies, they went, they came back. Okay, fine. The high Torah is this is about your spiritual journey.
So take a look at one more piece of this, which I think cements this idea. So if you look what happens next, so the 10 spies come and they completely rob the people of their confidence. Caleb and Joshua are unable to bolster their spirits. The people say, it's better we die here in the desert. Let's go back to Egypt. Moses gives up and God gives up. And God says to them, it's in chapter 14 on verse 11, right? God says, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Ad Ana, how long will this people spurn me? And how long will they have no faith in me despite all the signs that I've performed in thy midst? How long is this going to take? How long? And it's ironic. It's only been 2 years. And God doesn't get how you change people. And so God says, in the last parsha, Moses gives up. This time God gives up. God says, I'm going to kill them all. I'm going to kill them all and make you a great nation. I'll start over again with you, right? I did it with Noah. I'll do it with you. And Moses says, no. Which is one of the great trade-offs in the Bible, because whenever Moses gets mad, God calms him down. And when God gets mad, Moses calms him down. And Moses says, you can't do that because it'll be terrible for your PR. And then God calms down and God says, okay, and here's the part I want to look at. It's 14. Look at 14, 19, right? Slach la avona amazeh ki godel chazdecha v'kasher nesata la amazeh ki mimitzrayim adhena. Now, wait a minute. I know those words. Moses says to the people, pardon, I pray you, the iniquity of this people according to your great kindness, as you have forgiven this people ever since Egypt. And God responds, Vayomer Adonai, salachti kidvarecha. Okay, says God. Okay, I have forgiven them. Where do I know these verses from? These are the verses we recite right after Kol Nidre, Erev Yom Kippur. There's a one time a year every Jew in the world is in shul on time, by the way. They're there. And after the Chazan shines Kol Nidre for the third time, this is what we read. Now think of that. That means that at that moment when the entire Jewish people stands in front of God, Erev Kol Nidre, Erev Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre night, standing there praying with our hearts, asking for forgiveness, we are reiterating this moment when we were the people who refused to accept the dream. We were the people too afraid to accept the promise. We were the people too afraid to move, and we're ready to die there in the desert. And Moses prays, and God says, I'll forgive you. This is the perennial human condition. And that's why the rabbis advance it and put it into our liturgy. And so you're exactly...
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think there's another piece to it, and that's it's hard to live. I would say it's impossible to live your life too close to God. That God wants to be with the people on a level of intimacy that the people simply cannot spiritually accommodate. He comes down, they say, look, we can't hear your voice. Just go, Moses. You tell Moses, he'll tell us. They can't bear that closeness. So God is sort of like an unrequited lover. He wants to be closer to the people than they want to allow him to be. And that's what this is. And Moses, it's ironic because Moses, who wants to be close to God, when it's a choice between being close to God and giving up the people, Moses gives up being close to God in order to save the people. So I think this idea, we want to be close to God, we want God in our life, that's true, but we're not just talking about a friend. We're talking about God here and the power and the awe and the terror of being close to that kind of power, that kind of purity, that kind of, that kind of love, but it's just overwhelming. The mystics speak about dvekut, that they spoke about it in contradistinction to the mystics of the other traditions, particularly the Christian traditions, which spoke of unio mystica, which meant for certain religious traditions, the highest goal of religious life is to disappear into God. We have that in Buddhism. We have it in Hinduism. And we have it in Christianity. You disappear into God. But Judaism still treasures and affirms the unique humanness of all of us and says, no, you can't disappear into God. You can be glued up close to God. That's dvekut. You could be close to God, but you cannot disappear into God.
Look, both of us have had the experience as when we were younger of having wonderful teachers we truly loved, and teachers who really shaped and molded us,
Yes.
right? You had Nelson Glick, I had Harold, I had David Hartman. But I got to tell you something, and as much as I love these men, really love them, I can only take them in small doses, because to be in the presence of your teacher is demanding, right? I don't want to disappoint him. I don't want to say something stupid. I don't want to show up without my homework, right? The God of the book of Numbers, especially this God, elsewhere it's a different image of God, but here, this is a God who is of absolute demands. He doesn't get that this is a slave people. He's not ready to forgive them. The later tradition introduced Shekhinah, a sort of motherly face of God, which is willing to forgive you for your faults and understand your shortcomings and pardon your limitations. This God is ready to destroy you the moment you screw up. It's really hard to be in the presence of a God like that.
Yes.
Right? What's missing from this God, I hate to put it in sexual terms, or gender terms, but it's the forgiving face of the mother. It's the forgiving face of the mother who says, it's okay. I love you anyway. I know you screwed up. I love you anyway. I'm never going to let go of you. This is the demanding Father God.
Yes. And that's why both Judaism and Christianity create spiritual beings to fulfill the need for the loving, nurturing mother God. In Judaism, it's the Shekhinah, which is in contradistinction to the masculine HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, the masculine part of God. The other part of God, the Shekhinah, is the part that's with us in exile and nurtures us. And we say the Lecha Dodi prayer on Friday night to welcome that Sabbath queen, that Shekhinah, into our lives. And of course, for Christianity, it's Mary. It's Mary. So this idea that our religions are so different, and it's true in some ways, is also untrue. We all felt the same fear of hanging out too closely with the demanding Father God. And Freud, of course, took that riff off on his understanding of religion. as this demanding nuclear psychological drama, which was the Oedipal conflict. But for us, we need both. We need Avinu and we need Malkeinu. We need something nurturing and we need something transcendent. And when I hear sermons from particularly young rabbis who are imbued with this sort of pal theology, I call it. Hi, God, it's me. It's David. Hi, how are you doing? You're my pal, right? No, I tell him, no. This is the God who created universes. This is a God who will decide when you die. This isn't a God you pal around with. It's a God who directs you, who inspires you, who commands you. Yes, who forgives you, but that idea that whenever we reduce God to our dimensions, I find it particularly problematic. And the theologies that I most admire, obviously the theology of Maimonides being the greatest, are those that acknowledge that this transcendent God can only be approached to some degree, but we cannot enter the divine mystery because we are human. When we're dead, we enter it completely. Then in the world to come, that's the promise, that your soul, freed of bodily lusts, freed of bodily sins, freed of the distractions of life, that soul enters God's mystery completely. But I have never, until now, in your wonderful midrash, I have never seen the spies as emblematic of the spiritual journey as strongly as I do this week. Which is why, for me, reading this every year is worth it. Because some years you just pass through this and it's a story of spies who entered the land and they gave up. But this year, I see it as part of our own journey. And if I might connect it to some reality here, it's about what's going on in the streets of America now. And everyone is clear about the same facts about America. Most cops are good, some are bad. This is that. We no longer have slavery in America, but there's still the scourge of systemic racism. So everyone's saying we've gone a long distance, but we have further to go. And what it seems to me, Ed, is that we're dividing up as a country into two groups. One who focuses on, look how far we've come from slavery, and that's the thing they focus on most. And the other group that says, but look how far we have to go. And both of them are right, just like both the slaves, the spies were right. Both groups are right. It's what they choose to believe. And that, I think, is true for each of us when we listen to the news. And I know we've spoken about that. The question is not what's on the news. We all know what's on the news. The question is, what do you believe about what's on the news? Are you surprised by the evil or are you surprised by the good? To me, and that's my final word on this, our task is to decide to be surprised by evil and not by good.
Thank you. The question I'm left with, though, is this question, and we could start all over again with this question, which is, what did God expect them to say? Send spies into the land. What did God expect? That they'd come back and say, it's a beautiful land, let's go take it, it's ours? They're walking into a settled land with settled cities, with cultivated farms, a whole civilization. These are slaves. These are people that spend their whole lives being beaten by settled civilization. It's a very strange.
So why do you think the slaves were sent, Ed?
I don't know. I think that see, one of the themes that I find in the Torah is God learning of human beings. And
Yeah.
part of the book of Bamidbar is God learning the dark side of the human being. And God doesn't understand their fear and doesn't get it. See, you read the presence of God as forbidding metaphysically. I read the presence of God forbidding morally, meaning here is the absolute morality confronting you, the absolute moral demand. And the moral demand that's absolute, that confronts me, scares the hell out of me because I know that I can't do it. And so what the tradition does is it gives me a way of dealing with the absolute moral demand. It gives me tshuva. I can attempt to fulfill the moral demand, but when I don't do it, I'm permitted to do tshuva and try again. And that gift of tshuva from God, that gift of forgiveness in the face of my tshuva, the idea that God waits for us to do tshuva, and when we do tshuva, if it's real tshuva, if it's real repentance, if it's real personal change, if it's a real turning, and by the way, the other meaning of the word latur is to turn. If it's a real turning of the soul, then God says, welcome back. Come back. So I want to end with the end of the parsha, because I think the last words of the parsha indicate that very clearly, right? So you're to wear tzitziot, you're to wear fringes. Why? Liman tiskeru, so that you remember. Because forgetting is part of the human repertoire. Forgetting who you are, forgetting what you are, forgetting why you're in the world, forgetting what's expected of you, forgetting your own moral capacity. Lo taturu, you're not to go off, but if you do go off, you'll see your tzitziot and it'll bring you back. In other words, you wear on your person the cure. You wear on your person the drug that will bring you back from the other side and put you back on the track, right? Leman tizkuru vasitem et kol mitzvot Adonai vasit, right? You will remember call mitzvotai v'item kedoshim lelohechem. You will be holy again. You wear tzitziot to remember to be holy again, to bring with you your history, your narrative, your struggles. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. That's why you're here. That's a remarkable thing. You wear on your person the reminder of who you really are, so that when you do screw up, here's the reminder that there is a way back. And here is a reminder of what you can be. I don't want this Shabbos to end without just a moment of remembering of what day this weekend. This weekend represents Juneteenth, which, as we've all learned now, is the anniversary of when the last slaves, the slaves in Texas, finally heard that they were liberated after this, not after the Civil War, but during the Civil War, by the Emancipation Proclamation. And I think what's remarkable is what the African American community and all of us now are searching for is a set of rituals to remember that. And I think this is an interesting indication. You should wear something to remind you that you're a free person, and that the kind of freedom you enjoy is something that has to be deserved and earned and nurtured all the time. Leman tiskuru, so that you don't forget who you are meant to be, the vision of who you can be now that you're a free person. Mark, thank you for joining me this Shabbos. I want to thank all of our friends and wish you all a very, very good Shabbos. Following our broadcast this morning, of course, please stay tuned for Shabbos morning davening with the rabbis and cantors of EBS. And about 11:30 this morning, Rabbi Hillel Silverman will bring his interpretation of this Torah portion. Havdalah tonight at 8:30. I wish you a very, very good Shabbos. Good night, Mark. Take care.
Good Shabbos, Ed.